This video is for lesson 8 in the beginner series. As I mentioned before, the pace of new things being introduced slows down as we go through the beginning sequence because we have more and more material to review and refine as we're going through. So today we really just introduced the scalp cut, and we start introducing what we call the breaker game, which is using the Meister how to break particular guards. So Meyer just says that the scalp cut is just a vertical downward high cut. That's all he says. In Ringek, he mentioned specifically keeping the arms high. So when we look at throwing the scalp cut, we really look at from either of the high guards. We want to throw with high hands, and we really emphasize the soft lead hand in particular, because this is really a casting cut to get the maximum range. So whether we're starting from the high overhead Vamtag or the lower one from the shoulder, we focus in terms of the cut, we focus on high hands. And so that means we really need to allow the lead hand to flex into even more dramatically of that saber or handshake grip, as opposed to having the death grip on the sword, because if we try to do this, we're going to hurt our wrists. So we really just focus on high hands, maximizing the range. I have no problem letting the handle slide in my fingers a little bit, and that's really the only difference from, say, a standard vertical cut where we're still going to end at about with our hands about the shoulder or sternum level. We just really want to make sure that our hands are staying a little bit higher. The other thing that we focus a lot when we're using the scalp cut, in particular to break Alber, which is the kind of traditional understanding, is that we really want to focus on that offline step. If I stay in front of somebody in a point forward guard and they panic, I really don't want to just get stuck in the gut, even if I'm throwing the canonically correct counter to that guard. So we really focus on throwing this with a slide off of the line, just in case person freaks out. We don't double. I hate double kills, it's very frustrating, and you might get stabbed in the junk, and nobody likes that ever. So we really just focus on high hands, getting off the line, and just maximizing the range. Once students feel comfortable with this kind of casting, high-handed, high-armed scalp cut, we start introducing them to the breaker game. And we have a series of escalations. So first we just talk about what master cuts break certain guards, and we talk about what breaking means. Breaking, the way I say is, breaking doesn't always mean I'm going to hit my opponent, but it does mean I'm going to force them out of their guard. So the breaker to an overhead cutting guard is the thwart cut, because I can come in under that back edge attack, and I can possibly catch a downward cut and hit them at the same time, or I can threaten them out of it in a safe way. Whether they're in a high guard where I might hit their elbow, or they're next to their head where I might hit them in the head, they have to deal with that. And certainly I could come in with a low attack, but I'm not covering anything, and they might deal with that by just panicking and slamming me in the head. So I want to make sure that I'm going to force them out of that high guard. I'm going to force them to move in a way that keeps me safe. Similarly, if I'm in plow or long point, the squinting cut is going to take advantage of that point forward guard, and whether I gain the blade and then stab them, or they move to deal with that, it's still forcing them out of that guard. So I either get to hit them or I get to force them out of their guard. Either way, I'm breaking their guard. The crump out against ox, same thing. Doesn't matter which of the ox that they are in. If I can sidestep and throw a high cross, I'm threatening their hands, and they have to deal with that in some way. So I might hit the hands, and in sparring I would say it's about 50-50. I hit the hands a lot, but also if people see it coming, they have to move to deal with that. So again, you're either hitting them or forcing them out of that guard so it's broken. And then again, Alber, if they're in that low guard, we use the scalp cut to try to make them move out of that. I would say the way we break Alber most of the time in sparring tends to be that they move out of it, as opposed to just hitting them in the head while they're in a low guard. Most people will react in some way, which is part of why we emphasize getting off the line so much. So once students have practiced those 4 situations in isolation and repetition, we introduce them to the first version of the breaker game, and we try to make sure that students have to make one choice. They're either going to throw one of 2 things. So the feeder, and it starts off very statically. The feeder will start out in kind of a generic middle guard, and the first guard, and in the first way, from a very static position, they're either going to pull up to the high guard, or they are going to drop to Alber, and that's it. So, and you reset every time. So if I'm the feeder and my opponent is over there, they have to decide which of the master cuts to use. I'm going to pull up into the high guard. Hopefully they thwart me, and then we reset. And I could do it again. I could pull up into the high guard again, or I could drop into Alber. And if I do, hopefully they're going to step out and throw the scalp cut. And we just practice very, very robotically in isolation, right? Just making one of those two choices. Once that's flowing pretty well, we'll escalate it a little bit where the feeder is going to move a little bit. And that's going to force the counter attacker to move as well. So now, rather than just being a robot that doesn't move, I might switch my feet a little bit. I might shuffle forward. I might shuffle back. I'm just getting them used to, in motion, when they see the feeder pull up into a guard, they get to make that right choice. We usually spend quite a bit of time there, because once you add even that little bit more motion, students find that more challenging than just the static robotic version. Once we've been doing that for a while, then we switch to the same thing where we're robotic, and now we're either pulling up into ox to feed the crump, or we'll pull back into plow to feed the squinter. Starts off very robotically again, and then we'll start adding the footwork and the movement. And the counterattacker, the person who's being fed the master cuts that they should attack, once motion starts happening, they're welcome to switch guards and just try to get a little bit more loose and fluid, because we don't want to train people to try to spar like robots very stiffly. So we're just introducing a little bit of motion and fluidity. When students have been doing those two with a little bit of motion and they feel pretty good about it, then we'll give the feeder all of the options. So the feeder is still going to be kind of starting in this middle guard, and then they can pick any guard they want. So they might be here, and I pull into ox. The person will throw the correct master cut. They'll come back. Maybe they'll pull into plow over here or into Alber, and the same thing. And we again bring it back to that much more static version of the drill. And then after that's comfortable with, now we have to, decide between 4 master cuts to throw to break a particular guard. Then we'll introduce the movement. So by the end of this escalation, and it might happen in one day, it usually takes a couple class sessions before we get all the way to the level. We want to get to a kind of sparring level of motion, where if I'm the feeder, I'm definitely being much more active. I might shuffle several times back. I want the pace and variation of my movement to increase more, and then I'll again pull up to the guard and freeze, give the opponent a chance to throw the correct response. And so we want to teach them the concept of the breakers, and then we want to teach them the mechanics in isolation, make a couple choices in isolation, a couple choices within movement, and then all 4 choices within movement. And then we're trying to bridge the gap between theory and very robotic drilling and having the correct response in sparring. And the only way you can do that is to drill those responses, but you need a little bit more input than just standing like a robot once you get past the initial motion. So for this lesson, we really just talk about the scalp cut, and then we introduce the first variation on the breaker game. Depending on how that goes, we might get to the feeder going through all 4 of the guards, primary guards, but usually that takes about 2 lessons. And that's kind of what we do for this part of the beginner series.